Welcome to the Access to Inspiration podcast, where you can be inspired by people who may be unlike you. I'm Sue Stockdale, and if you haven't yet connected with us on social media, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching for Access to Inspiration. Or if you want to read a transcript of this episode, go to our website, accesstoinspiration.org. Today we're going to be focusing on the subject of elite performance, and my guest today is Dr. Barry Fudge. He has supported elite runners over 4 Olympiads to help them to achieve their goals. Barry has a PhD in physiology and was until recently head of endurance at British Athletics, where he constructed a world-leading endurance programme for both coaches and athletes, ensuring that when a British endurance runner stood on the start line of a race, they were the best prepared athlete in the field. So standing on the start line today, welcome Barry.
Hey Sue, how are you doing?
Fantastic. Well, it's great to hear from you. And I know that your programme was built around the motto of owning the start line, and it helped to produce the multiple Olympic successes of people like Sir Mo Farah, who's won 4 Olympic titles. So what is it that's really important when people want to be owning the start line?
So there's a couple of things really that I focused on with the athletes and coaches. But the main thing was trying to get a bit of emotion going, which to spark that creativity with them. And the concept is that they start with the end in mind. So they visualize themselves standing on the start line, say, for example, in Tokyo next summer, and thinking about all the things that they need to do to feel confident, to feel happy, to feel like they're ready to go and take on the world when that gun goes off. So they start with that concept and it stirs some emotion in them and it starts to make them think about, right, perhaps I need to have done this workout, or I need to have been this body weight, or I need to have spoken to this person, and so on. So it starts to create something that goes, right, by this point, next August, I need to have done this. And then it allows a conversation about how do you get to that point.
Now, I can see that making sense with the athletes themselves, because they are the ones doing the work to be owning that start line. How does it work with the coaches? Because they're having to work through the athlete to ensure that the athlete's best prepared. So does it work the same way to motivate the coaches?
I think it does. And in many ways, it's more of a technical conversation as opposed to an emotional conversation. So for them, for example, there might be a specific set of workouts they needed to have completed by then. And sometimes it's very easy to think, I'll just do them by that point. But actually, the underlying physiology and the preparation required to get them to be able to do those workouts successfully takes a lot of thought. And it might start in October, the year before, and it might have various bits that they need to put in through the year to get them to that point. So it's more of a technical conversation as opposed to what is going to make me feel confident, what is going to drive that performance when I stand in the start line if you're an athlete.
One of the things that really focused our minds in the UK many years ago was the film Chariots of Fire. If we can remember that visual of all the athletes running across the sand in St Andrews in Scotland. And inspiration really can have a pivotal role in encouraging people to strive for more than they think is possible. What inspired you to have a career in sport, and in particular in athletics?
Just generally, sport is inspirational to people everywhere in the world, no matter where you are. It's something that does capture the imagination of people wherever you go and whoever you speak to. But for me personally, I grew up in a house where sport was massively important. My dad was Welsh, so we all played rugby. I've got a twin brother as well, so there was always fierce competitiveness around sport. And actually, the thing that got me into working in sport was, I don't know whether your listeners remember the old British Lions VHS tapes that used to come out after each tour. And for me, it was, if I can't play at that level, I would like to work at that level and be part of a team that contributes towards performance. So for me, it was watching that the team behind the team on those VHS tapes quite a while ago that inspired me to go to university and learn about sports science.
What is it about sports science these days that really has such a pivotal role in influencing athletes' success?
When I first started doing my studies in sport, most of the testing was done in the laboratory, and it was, quite an extensive process, a lot of control around testing and so on. Nowadays, technology with things like GPS and heart rate and all the fancy gadgets that are out there now, a lot of science is actually done in the field. So whether it's, measuring an athlete's sleep or whether it's measuring an athlete's run, there's all sorts of technology there now that allows the sports scientist to work with a coach to perfect performance, which is completely different than going in and doing a very controlled experiment in a laboratory. Would have probably been in a university 20 years ago. When I first started doing my PhD out in Kenya, which was almost 15, 16 years ago, there was no such thing as GPS out there in terms of running. Now everyone has a Garmin watch or something similar that they track their training runs with, and they load them up to the internet, and the coach looks at it, or they use it in the social media profile. So technology's had a big impact on the way sports scientists can work. You don't actually have to work in a lab anymore. You can do it all from a computer.
And does that mean then that data and objectivity is playing a much more important role then?
I would say so. I mean, I think that sports science as an industry has struggled with data in terms of there can be too many data points. And so some of these GPS watches, for example, are measuring 10 to 100 times a second. And so there has been a bit of a paralysis at times around which bits of data and how to use. And I think that the bigger advances that are coming in sports science and data is just figuring out how to use it better, or how to get the information you need out of it more efficiently. Data now is what people are very interested in, particularly teams where they perhaps have lots of players and so on, and they're able to do a very quick audit or analysis of where players are at.
So, in terms of the world of elite performance, which is what you've been immersed in for a number of years, Barry, what is it that you enjoy about working in that world?
It goes back to that inspirational thing, I think, as well. It does motivate me and it does inspire me to see what some of these people can do. They literally are the best in the world at what they're doing. And it's an honor almost to be part of something like that and see it unfold. And it's particularly in the world of endurance running, it's the dedication. You know, there's no such thing as an overnight success in endurance running. It's day to day grinding, grafting, sticking at it, lots of bad days when it's been tough. There's a lot to be said for dedication. And the thing I like particularly about the top end is the detail that you can apply, which kind of suits my personality of planning, analysing, and so on.
So, I can understand athletes and coaches for that matter being motivated to get to the top and to win an Olympic medal, for example. Yet, I'm imagining it's a bit more of a challenge to sustain that success at the top over a period of years. So, from your perspective, a sports scientist and somebody who's underpinning that success, what helps to motivate those athletes and coaches to sustain performance over time?
It's actually a really, really tough thing to do to stay on top. And very few sports people really stay at the top for a long time. They tend to be very exceptional people. You know, somebody like a Michael Phelps in swimming, or a Mo Farah in endurance running, or Usain Bolt in sprinting. They tend to be exceptionally talented individuals, but they do also go through very hard times in terms of emotionally or things that happen to them that they have to dig in and work against. So they're definitely not immune to that. But there's something unique with some of these people that seems to sit inside them that drives them on for one reason or another. And it's very hard to put your finger around. But when I was doing my PhD, it was based in Kenya, and it was around why are Kenyans so successful in endurance running. And one of the things that really came out of it was just their background, their environment that they're living in, and their desire to get out of that living where, you know, the average wage was $1 a day 20 years ago in Kenya. And the running world provided an opportunity for people to get out of the country, earn some money and come back. So I think there's different things that motivate different people. And that's certainly different than what would motivate a British athlete to go out and be successful right now. It's actually a very interesting area, but I think quite a lot of it is the people that are around you, the people that motivate you. It's not just about winning medals after medals. It's the people around you that keep you going, I think, is one of the things for sure.
So, having a broader support system, people who are there to be with you during the highs and the lows, that is pretty important.
Exactly, yeah. Particularly the lows, I think, is a really important thing. Over the years, I'd worked with Mo Farah and watched him go to countless championships. But the one thing I would say that probably kept him going was the variety in terms of we always had a different year. So although it's running, the setup, the sessions, the way we went about certain things, tried to vary it so that it wasn't boring. It did provide a challenge. And the beauty of sport is that there's always some new challenge to go against as well. There's always something you're chasing, whether it's one more year or somebody's record. So that's one of the things about sport, that if your body allows you, you can keep going.
So, people might assume that elite athletes are full on at all times, that they're operating at their optimum. Now, I'm imagining that recovery is actually quite a critical part of the entire process. Would you agree? And if so, how do you factor in recovery?
100% agree. Again, take something like Mo Farah. At his best training-wise, he's probably only training for about 15 hours a week. The rest of the time he's recovering. Somebody smarter than me could work out the percentages, but it's a very small amount of time that you're actually training. Most of the adaptations come when you're resting and you're recovering. So it's massively important to understand that, particularly in sport. The training's just one component that you have to get right. Recovery is a bigger component that if you don't get right, you'll never make it. And particularly as athletes get older, you have to concentrate on that recovery and rest even more. If your body's not as young and adaptable as it used to be, the recovery is even more important. And it's probably the same for life in general. It's massively important that people rest and recover and look after themselves.
I'm thinking about some of the listeners who may be in the world of business. I think that health and well-being is becoming a much more prevalent part of the things to pay attention to in the workplace. Have you seen that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, if you just take it from the sport world, that, this 80-20 sort of idea, which is probably around about what we're talking about, you 20% it is providing 80% of your gains. It's probably the same with recovery. And I think people in the corporate world can learn a lot from sport. And one of the things I particularly like is the concept of sprints, where you have a goal within a period of time. And in sport, that could be 4 weeks to 6 weeks, where you work very hard and concentrate on a certain thing. And then there's a block of recovery. And then you identify another 4 to 6 weeks and you go hard again. And then that works in life and business as well. That idea of identifying a target, which is quite close, going as hard as you can, having a break, going again. The human body likes cycles.
If you're enjoying this episode, you'll probably want to keep up to date with all the news from us. Hop on over to our website at accesstoinspiration.org and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do this at the foot of the homepage. And while you're there, tell us about what you think of the podcast series and which guests you have enjoyed the most. We'd love to hear from you. That brings us on to the subject of Tokyo, of course, because the expected cycle of the Olympics this year has not happened. How do you think that athletes and coaches need to be adapting to the delay of the Olympics?
It's a fascinating question because I don't think anyone really knows. I think the people that do accept where they're at and adapt instead of complaining and wondering what they're going to do will be the ones who be successful. Unfortunately, there's nothing really anyone can do. And this idea about you can only control the things you can control. You can't be changing the world. We can't be changing what's going on with coronavirus. So the ones who are able to adapt, accept it, move on, will be the ones that will probably be successful next year. The ones who spend the next 6 months worrying about how they can access their gym or where they're going to train will probably struggle. But yeah, it's a fascinating one. Who knows where we're going to be in 4 months' time, never mind 8 months' time. So it will be interesting. And I think even if we get to the Olympic Games and it goes ahead, but the crowds aren't there for one reason or another, again, it'll be fascinating on how people perform in an empty stadium without the usual buzz that they get from a 80 or 90,000 seater stadium. So I think that there's so many interesting questions about sport and COVID and what will happen.
That's an interesting conundrum for us all to be observing as and when and if the Olympics happen in 2021. So thinking about your journey in sport, Barry, and your career, what motivates you to keep going?
Through my journey, it's definitely changed from beginning to end. And I think over the last couple of years, it's been more about helping other people achieve their goals, or at least a realization it's about helping other people. I think it always has been. And I think now I'm no longer at British Athletics. When I was there, it was about helping those people that are identified by the Federation to be successful at Olympic Games. Now it's about helping a broader group of people. And it will be athletes, it will be coaches, but it could also be business. People who are interested in an insight into high performance sport and the detail and the planning that goes into it that might fit a business model that's similar. So it's very much about using some of the knowledge, experiences, some of the science from high performance sport to help other people in a broader sense. That's it. And it's quite exciting and we'll see what happens.
As you've been going along on your journey, Barry, how or who motivates and inspires you?
I'm always massively inspired by the athletes in terms of what they're doing. I think it does drag you along in terms of their story, their journey, their challenges, their highs, their lows. One of the misconceptions probably, if you work in sport, is that it's this glorious lifestyle and it's great and all the rest of it. The reality is that there's normally a moment at some point where it comes good. The rest of it's hard work, it's grafting. And I really enjoy contributing to that journey, even if they're not winning the gold medal. It's helping people for me, is massively inspirational, and it does motivate me. I do love sitting watching sport as well on TV, and I think that does motivate me to keep doing that type of thing. But I am motivated in a slightly different way now in terms of trying to use my experiences over the last 4 Olympiads that I've been part of elite sport to help other people. And it does make me wake up in the morning with a slightly different emphasis than what I was doing before, but it's nonetheless very rewarding.
So the sense I get from what you've talked about on a number of answers to the questions is about the importance of attention to detail. And I'm just wondering if you can give us some examples of what sort of details are athletes and coaches paying attention to these days. You touched on the idea of technology as something that can give us detail. I'm just thinking of the average athlete out there that wants to get better. What details should they be paying attention to?
Part of the process of the Own the Start line is you visualize and you think about all the things that you need to do. But I then also employ another strategy that I call ADAPT. So ADAPT. And A is for ambition. So you work for a process and you go, right, so what do you want to do? And for some of the people that I worked with, it might be to win a medal. But it could be I want to run a sub 4 hour marathon, or I want to improve my golf handicap, whatever it might be. That's my ambition. Then it's D and that's for determinants. And that's like, well, what does it really take? And in the world I was in, if I give you an example, if you're a 5,000 meter runner, a male 5,000 meter runner, you know that you've got to be able to run under 13 minutes. You've got to be able to run the last kilometer in 2 minutes, 24 seconds. And you've got to be able to run the last lap in 54 seconds. And you've got to have a body weight less than 56 kilos. Those are the types of details that a coach, an athlete would be looking at. And so it's very much, what does it truly take? And then what underpins that is the next one, which would be assess. So where are you now with some of these components? And where are you now with some of the things that we can test? So in endurance running, you could test in the lab for some of these qualities that underpin a 13-minute 5K or a 2:24 last K. So you have A, D, A, and then the most important bit is probably P, which is process. And the idea behind the process is just trying to work out what are the things that would actually make the biggest difference, and then which order should we do them in. So again, when you sit with lots of athletes and coaches, and I'm sure businesses do this as well, they come up with lots of ideas about how to be better. But the idea behind this component is, how do we find out what will actually make the biggest difference or make the biggest gains? And then which order do we do them in? And then the last one's team. Who's on your team? Who are the people that are accountable for the various things that we're going to do? When you pull it all together, you hopefully at the end of that session, you have a nice plan. And it kind of brings together, right, what's the problem? What's the ambition? What's it going to take? Where are you now? What are we going to do first? And who's accountable, or who's going to help you do it? That's the sort of world that I would work in, very process driven, but done in a very natural conversational sense that is not like a tick box exercise. It's very much just a process to work through and hopefully get the best out of people that way.
I love that. I love the simple acronym, the easy descriptions, and yet no doubt the difficulty that lies behind that. And I imagine that for some people, when they get to the assess element of it and actually start to really understand what something takes, that may switch them off at that point.
It does, yeah. And it takes a lot of honesty to do it properly. A lot of people are unsuccessful because they're not honest enough with themselves. And again, businesses, I'm sure, are the same. There's lots of stories about businesses who didn't see what was in front of them because they believed in their own paradigm. I think it's the same with athletes and coaches as well, that without that honesty, sometimes you get lured down the wrong path. Also, I think bringing somebody in external as well. So in my previous role, although I was the head coach for the program, I was external in many senses to most of the conversations athletes and coaches would have together. And I was able to come in and provide that structure and that framework and give some outside perspective that maybe they wouldn't already see. So, yeah, I mean, it's adapt or die, I used to say. It sounds a bit harsh, but in sport, it's kind of true as well. It's a fast-moving game that you have to keep your eye on and review and plan regularly what you're going to do against what it truly takes.
My final thought, Barry, is that formula sounds relevant for people going into a world that is known, so one can understand what the realities are that are required, as you say, to run a world-leading 5,000 metres, for example. What about for businesses or for athletes or sports people that truly want to step into the world of the unknown? They want to do something that's never been done before. How would you adapt the adapt metaphor?
That's a really tough question. And I think a lot of it is trying to predict the future. In British cycling, for example, the way technology moved on for them in terms of aerodynamics and bikes and so on, that what it would have taken to win a gold medal in the previous Olympics is no more relevant. So they're always looking for, where's it going to go to next? There is a certain amount of prediction, whereas in track and field, what it takes to win is actually reasonably stable. There's always outliers, but there's a generalization about what it's going to take. Having the right people around you asking the right questions is probably the key thing. Like, what about this or what about that? And have you thought about that? But I still think a framework such as ADAPT or On the Start Line allows you to work through some of those problems. Again, quite often I think it's good to have an external person lead you through that sometimes. You can get stuck in your own paradigm and your own way of thinking if it's just you and your team sitting in the office as you do every Thursday or whatever. I think that's quite important.
Well, I think you've given us a real insight into what sounds simple as a series of activities that it takes to get to improving one's performance, but it's consistency over time and relentless focus on those things, which sounds much harder.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you think about the business world, you might get a flash in the pan business that does well, but to have continual success, you do have to keep your eye on the game. You do have to keep planning and reviewing and checking where you're at, moving forward and adapting all the time. And it's exactly the same in sport. It's no different. And it does take quite a special leader or person around you to keep you in that frame of mind and not take it for granted. I'm sure listeners can think of all different types of companies that haven't adapted and moved with the times. A good example might be Nokia with the phone. They were once the top companies in the world, but they didn't adapt and they didn't move forward with what was happening. And sport and business is exactly the same.
Well, it's been lovely to speak to you, Barry, today. And how can listeners find out more about you and the services that you offer on the internet and social media?
I've got a website, www.lap25.com. I'm on Instagram as well, lap25_consultancy. I'm just starting out with some new projects. My company's based around education, support and inspiration, and lots of hopefully exciting things from the world of high performance sport that can help lots of different people in lots of different walks of life.
Fantastic. Well, it's been inspiring to talk to you today, Barry. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Sue.
So I wonder what Barry's experiences motivated you to do differently. Are you going to get out your training shoes and start running now? Or even improve your running if you've already started? If you enjoyed what he had to say, then please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. Just go over and search for Access to Inspiration. We're setting up a listeners panel recorded discussion where you can discuss with other listeners what you have gleaned from these podcasts and what they have caused you to think or do differently. If you'd like to find more about that and how you can be involved, then drop us a line by going on over to the website accesstoinspiration.org and leave us a message on the contact page. Next week, we will be continuing with the theme of sustainability with my guest, Milena Cvijanovic, a designer and architect who will be discussing the concept of sustainable luxury. I hope you can join us then.